Amen. Well, I remember when I was little and just getting my first bike. I don't know if any of you guys remember this, but this bike that I got. It didn't have rubber tires. It was hard wheels. I don't know if you remember those. Not like plastic on like a wiffle ball bat or something, but it was just hard wheels. Now I was excited. It was the greatest day of my life. You know, I was probably like preschool, maybe even younger. It was the greatest day of my life. Like I had a bike now, but then I remember kind of looking at the wheels and like I don't remember or thought bikes weren't like this, but it's just hard wheels. And so I guess I didn't have to worry about flat tires or anything, but it was more like you worry about like this hard plastic chipping off, you know, and you're rolling, you know, hitting like that and stuff. But it was great then, just as I was really young having this bike. Couldn't really do a whole lot of jumps. I guess I was really young anyway, so it wouldn't, you know, really matter. But I do remember my second bike, and I believe this was called an MT Racer, I think is what it was. I don't know if anybody had one of those, but I remember that. And I was excited. First off, I checked the wheels. I was like, okay, these are rubber wheels. This is great. This is going to be a night. This is a great day. This is my greatest day of my life. So I had this bike, and I thought it was great. I could do more jumps with it. It got a little bit better. Life was a little bit better. You know, like I could, like, had a little bit more of a swagger, you know, about me with this type of a bike. Like, this is cool, you know, and this one. But then the last bike I got, I was excited about this. You can look this one up. Sometimes I still go back and I look online. I'm like, dude, how did that look? It was a Kuhara. I don't know if anybody even knows what it starts with a K, Kuhara. This was like a Cadillac of bikes. I mean, this was really cool. In fact, this one almost cost as much as my first car. I mean, my first car was $750, but this, yeah, but it was like, man, back then though, this was a lot. This was really cool. Now, here's about this bike is that, you know, mag wheels. I don't think that's even cool anymore, but it had these mag wheels. It was like purple or blue, I think, or whatever. No, I think I had blue mag wheels. Pegs on the front and the back, which is cool. And then I can like carry people, you know, we put like 10 people on a bike, you know, like a clown bike. We could do all that. And then what was really cool about this is like, you know, you have the handbrakes now because you have the pull handbrakes instead of the back where sometimes that would mess you up. Now I can go freewheel, you know, I can freestyle and kind of go backwards, but now I have the handbrakes up here. But you can't spin the handlebars all the way around unless you had a rotor on there, which this one did. I was like, this thing has everything. So it had this, and all the cables that go through there, so you could spin the handlebars around, no problems at all. And this was great. So I went out, ramping everything, doing all kinds of cool stuff, wrecking on my bike too. I did that too. I hear you. I feel you, man. I did the same thing. But I did a lot of that. I mean, it was cool. That was the greatest thing. And I remember sitting there with my friends as we were like in third or fourth grade or whatever. We were sitting there. We're like, man, we're like, do you remember, we're like reminiscing, you remember the old bikes? Yeah, we're like, it all led up to this, you know, it all led to this. This is the good days. Like, it can't get any better than this, you know, and that's really what we thought about with our bikes. Now, last week we talked about Jesus being greater than everything. We talked about looking at the Old Testament, the Old Covenant, and how it always pointed up to something greater. That was what my story was about. I was pointing up to something better. That was my great segue into that. But no, he talked about the Old Covenant. The Old Covenant was there. It wasn't something that was just temporary. It wasn't something that was, you know, for no purpose. It wasn't as if God messed up. The Old Covenant was always pointing ahead. It always had a purpose, and it was pointing ahead to something better. It was always pointing ahead to Jesus. And that's what it was about. That's what you see, the Old Testament, the Old Covenant, all those things. We looked at in the book of Hebrews is where we'll be at again today. In the book of Hebrews, he almost systematically goes through different points here to show this, to show that Jesus is greater. And he goes in there, and he even started out in chapter 1. We looked at, he said he's greater than the angels. So you go in there, some people wrongly worship them. Some people wrongly put them at this position that they shouldn't be. And some people worship them. And even angels stopped and said, no, we don't deserve to be worshipped. Only God deserves to be worshipped. And so you're seeing this, and he's kind of going through this process, and he's saying, Jesus is greater than the angels. Because I think some of the people probably just look at Jesus like he was just another person. He's like, no, let me take you through this system here. He says, the angels, we understand they're different from us. We understand they're messengers from God. Jesus is greater than the angels. And then he goes on and says, Jesus is greater than Moses, which I mentioned last week, this was like a big jump. This is the big jump up there because Moses brought the law. Moses had this tremendous relationship with God. I even talked about when he went up on the mountain and he came down and his face was glowing because he had been with God. I mean, there was this closeness right there. He was glowing because he had been in the presence of God. This was something different. This was literally glowing. I've stuck my fork and sockets or whatever hit wires and I've had a glow or whatever. I've shocked and I've jumped back and had a spark. But I wasn't glowing because I was in the presence of God. Maybe I was about to be there or something. But he was in the presence of God, and he was glowing there, and he had the law, and he was the greatest of the prophets there. And you see this. And he said, Jesus is greater than Moses. That was another jump up there. That was a big step in there. That was tough for people because they always looked back to the law and said, this is what we need to follow. And he said, no, he's greater than him. And he talked about him being greater than the priesthood. Remember, we looked at the priests and we said, okay, what did the priests do in the Old Testament? It's different now. What did they do? Well, they were there to intercede for the people. They were there to offer sacrifices, which we don't have to do that now. Jesus was the once-for-all sacrifice. But they did that. They did those sacrifices. They went into the temple, into the Holy of Holy rooms where God's Spirit would come. And they went in there and they interceded for the people. They made the sacrifice. They were right there. They were the only ones who could do that. And we talked about him saying, okay, you understand the place of that. Well, Jesus is a priest in a different order than that. He's not a priest in the order of Levi. He's a priest in the order of this guy that we see in the Old Testament who just came out of nowhere, Melchizedek. He's in the order of him because this guy was not in this order. In fact, he was before the law. He's just this guy that seemed to show up out of nowhere. And so he's kind of comparing Jesus to that and saying he's in this order. He's the great, once-for-all high priest. We don't need another person like one of us to go into the Holy of Holies to be there with God to intercede for us. He said Jesus, by going to the cross, he broke all that. In fact, at the crucifixion, when he was up there, the veil of the temple that separated this Holy of Holy rooms, it supernaturally just tore. What a crazy event that happened. It just tore, signifying now us, by faith in Christ, we can go into that Holy of Holies. We can go that, meaning, like, we can just pray to him. You can go straight to him, and it talks about us being able to go straight to the throne of grace. We cannot, like you can pray as you're right there. You can go to him, and you can talk, and you can pray, and you can have this relationship with him. It's different now. That old covenant was pointing ahead. It was almost like a babysitter, like training us up to show what it was always pointing to, and it was always pointing to Jesus. And that's what he was doing. That's what he was trying to say. He's greater than the angels. He's greater than Moses. He's greater than the law. He's greater than this priesthood. In fact, he's the once-for-all, finish-it-all, eternal high priest. And so that's what he talked about, and that's what we saw as he was going through that. Jesus showed, I'll put this up on the screen, Jesus showed what the temporary pointing to. The temporary was always pointing to Jesus, was always pointing to what he was going to be doing. Now I want to get into Hebrews chapter 8. I want to look at this right here if you guys want to follow along, if you have your Bibles, or you can follow along up here. Hebrews 8, 1 through 6. He's still kind of making this case. And I said before last week, go and read this all together. I'm like summarizing a whole lot of this, but you can just see the whole flow of what he's trying to do, what he's trying to get us to see in this. But look at Hebrews 8, 1 through 6. He says, now the main point of what we're saying is this. We do have such a high priest who sat down at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven, and who serves in the sanctuary, the true tabernacle, set up by the Lord, not by a mere human being. Every high priest is appointed to offer both gifts and sacrifices, so it was necessary for this one also to have something to offer. And he's pointing back to the priesthood that they had to bring in these offerings, and he said, okay, Jesus is not immune to this, but he didn't bring in something different. He brought himself in there. If he were on earth, he would have to be a priest. He would not be a priest, for there are already priests who offer the gifts prescribed by the law. They serve at a sanctuary that is a copy and shadow of what is in heaven. This is why Moses was warned when he was about to build the tabernacle. See to it that you make everything according to the pattern shown you on the mountain. But in fact, the ministry Jesus has received is as superior to theirs as the covenant of which he is a mediator is superior to the old one, since the new covenant is established on better promises. So the temporary had a place. And you see what he's pointing out. He's talking about this being this tabernacle, this temporary tabernacle. God made them. He had specific things. He said, I want you to do it this way because he wanted them to see something in heaven. It was temporary, but he had specific things like build it this way, have this design in here because I want you guys to see like a little picture of how it is in heaven. It was always temporary. This temporary tabernacle is pointing ahead later on to being with God, being with him in his presence in heaven. And so it was a temporary place. But it had a plan. I mean, it had a purpose for that. Do you guys ever have any botched plans or any failed plans? I've had many. I've had probably even sermons I've had that were botched. This will be a good joke. Now, I've had many jokes that I thought were going to be good, and I said it in my head like it's going to go great, and then when it came out, it like just fell flat. Nobody laughed. Never happened here. This was other places. Talking to people, plans, maybe even in sports, like I had ideas, okay, you get everybody together, like, here's our play. We're going to run this play. It's going to work perfectly. I'm going to give you the ball, and this is going to happen. They're going to run over here, and it's going to fool them. We're going to do this. And then you run the play, and it's like they knew it, and that hammered you down, and it, like, botched plan, just failed plan. Happens all the time. When I was 14, I had a failed plan. Some of you guys know of jumping off someone's back, just wanting this short white guy to dunk a basketball, and it failed miserably, I was told, when I woke up, and I'm still paying for that, later on in life. There's all kinds of failed plans we have, but I want us to see about this is that this wasn't a failed plan of God. I don't know. I say that, and I bring that up because I know some people who feel like when you see the Old and the New Testament, I talked about this a little bit last week. Sometimes, and I've heard people say that when they look at the whole Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament, they just think, well, there's just a separation there because this big section back here, the Old Testament, was just a messed up plan. God had an idea. Maybe we messed it up. Maybe God was going to try something out, but it just didn't work, so he changed it up. And it's the New Testament. Jesus came in, and it worked a lot better. No, this always worked together. This was always God's plan. God always had this plan of having this covenant like point ahead to Jesus. He had this temporary plan that was going to be pointing ahead to what Jesus was going to do and finish permanently. That's what this was always about. And I want us to see that. Even in verse 5, he said, the sanctuary was just a copy and a shadow of what is in heaven. I said last week, and I think this is true, I see this more and more, that I just see history and life on this planet and everything, and God's dealing with people. It's just almost like God's painting this picture for us. Like he's showing us the relationship he wants to have with us. He's showing us what he's done, why he's doing all this, and just pointing ahead to Jesus. Like you follow along with this, and you see this in here, even in the Bible. You see this plan. It's just like God painting this picture of us, showing us who he is, revealing who he is, revealing how he loves us, and revealing, in all honesty, our problem, what we've done, what we've messed up with sin. And he's just showing us all these things, and then he's pointing ahead to what actually needs to happen, to the remedy, which was Jesus. And he's pointing out all this stuff, painting it, showing it to us, illustrating to us, because I think we just miss this all the time. I've been in ministry for a while now, but still some of this, like I'm just starting to get some things. It's like it's a whole lifelong thing. I think we're slow at getting this many times, if we even get it at all. And he's just bringing us along, easing us along through history and showing us what he wants us to see. He wants us to have this relationship with him, and he's pointing that out. Last week I talked about typology. You remember we looked at this guy, if you weren't here, we looked at this guy in the Old Testament who just showed up out of nowhere, and I mentioned him a little bit ago, this high priest, Melchizedek, that there's not a whole lot about his life, and I think it was intentional because he's pointing ahead to Jesus. Jesus was going to be a high priest in this guy's order of just, we don't know where he came from. He's just a high priest in God. He was not in the order of the Old Testament law under Aaron and Levi. He just wasn't in this order. That he just came up and he was this high priest. God used him. And we talk about typology. We talk about these types of Christ. Not more than one Christ, but what we call them types of Christ. People maybe in the Old Testament that God used a certain way and had their ministry going a certain way that was going to be pointing ahead to Jesus and just pointing ahead to how he was going to be used. And so we look at Melchizedek was a type of Christ. Moses, Joshua, these guys who their lives pointed to what Jesus was going to be doing there. But there's also in the New Testament, this is what I like too, in the New Testament there's also parables that in a lot of ways they do the same thing. They point ahead to heaven. They point ahead to, or just show us what God is doing in our life. They show what Jesus is doing. They show what God's plan is, and he just tells these stories, and it talks about the love of God. And many times they'll start off with the kingdom of God is like. Heaven is like, and then he tells these stories. In fact, I want to read one here just to really see this. This is in Luke chapter 20. Parable of the tenants. And he went on to tell the people this parable. A man planted a vineyard, rented it to some farmers, and went away for a long time. At harvest time, he sent a servant to the tenants so they'd give him some of the fruit of the vineyard. But the tenants beat him and sent him away empty-handed. He sent another servant, but the one they sent they beat and treated shamefully and sent him away empty-handed. He sent still a third, and they wounded him and threw him out. Then the owner of the vineyard said, "What shall I do? I'll send my son, whom I love. Perhaps they'll respect him." But when the tenants saw him, they talked the matter together. "This is the heir," they said. "Let's kill him, and the inheritance will be ours." So they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. What then will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He'll come and kill those tenants and give the vineyard to others. When the people heard this, they said, "God forbid." Jesus looked directly at them and asked, "Then what is the meaning of that which is written, 'The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone'? Everyone who falls on that stone will be broken to pieces. Anyone on whom it falls will be crushed." The teachers of the law and the chief priests looked for a way to arrest him immediately because they knew he had spoken this parable against them, but they were afraid of the people. So, like I was saying, I was talking about types of Christ in the Old Testament. You can see how some of these people lived, and now we can look back and see Jesus' life and say, I see how this points to him. Well, with these parables, it's the same thing. This wasn't just some story that Jesus is like, there's a bunch of people showed up. I need to tell them some story, get them off my back. We'll get them some bread and fish or whatever. He's not just throwing some story out there. This is pointing ahead to what God's doing. Now, they may not have got it. Maybe everybody didn't fully understand this, but there was a point to this. You see this vineyard owner represents God. You see these tenants that are out there. You think about even the nation of Israel, and you think about some of the servants that are sent in there. You think about it being the prophets. They're going in there warning them, telling them about God. They've been thrown out. And then you see the son clearly represents Jesus right there. He says, "I'm going to send my son." Now, don't get lost in this of thinking like, was God like this story there where he's saying, "I wonder if I send my son, if maybe this is going to work out or something." Don't get lost in the details of that. It's not as if God is clueless about what's going to happen. I don't want you to take that from the story there. But what he is trying to say is, I sent my son here, and he was killed for this. In a lot of ways, these guys got this. In a lot of ways, they got, okay, he's doing this against us. And they were pretty angry about that. They're angry that he's telling this story, but he's telling the story. This is in my Father's business. He's saying this is what he's doing. This is how it's happening. This is how it's been going on through history. He's been using you guys. He's been trying to get this message out to you, but you've been throwing his message out there. So you see that with some of these parables. You see it with the Old Testament. Now in the New Testament, Jesus telling these stories. I really like how he's doing that. But the Old and the New Testament, it's always pointing ahead to either Jesus or to God or to heaven or what he's wanting to do. It's always pointing ahead. He's got a plan on that. In fact, write that down. God always has a plan. Such a simple statement right there, but man, do we got to understand that? We need to understand that. God always has a plan. If you've checked out on everything that I've said so far or whatever, I want you to get that right there. God always has a plan with what he's doing in our life, throughout history. In fact, he even goes down in Hebrews chapter 8. I'm not going to read this up here. But further down in chapter 8, he quotes from Jeremiah 31. If you have notes in your Bible right there on chapter 8, he goes down and he's quoting from Jeremiah 31, stating that God said hundreds of years before this, that God said, "I'm going to do a new covenant." So this wasn't something new. This wasn't like the Old Testament was there, and then you jump into the New Testament, and you're like, how does this work together? He's quoting from Jeremiah 31, where God said, I'm going to have a new covenant. So this was planned. This was always there. God was doing this. So don't think this is all a messed up plan, and you're just wondering, is God really behind all this? He says he was. He was planning all this. This is fulfilled prophecy. This day, like I said, when I mentioned about Palm Sunday, this day was prophecy that Jesus was going to come into the city. Like they knew that. The people there in that day who literally saw Jesus coming in the city, they understood this. This is a fulfilled prophecy. This is crazy. You talk about the palm branches and everything and him coming into town. They completely and fully understood this. He's fulfilling a prophecy here. Like in front of our very eyes right now, we're seeing this happen, and they're going back to the scriptures. But many of them had a tough time connecting him with the Old Testament when he wasn't really living up to what they thought he was supposed to be doing. But he's going back and he's saying, this is planned. I want you guys to really get that down. So you can think about it in your life this way. Okay, we leave here. I always say tomorrow's Monday. We got work and we got all this, and still got the rest of the day, so don't get too down on that. But you can think about through the rest of the week, the mundane, normal, routine things of our day. Sometimes we like to look at that and say, okay, is God in this? Is God in these little dealings right here? I was at the gym actually yesterday, and there was this guy who came up to me and just started talking, and it usually kind of goes in this way. Usually we're talking about, it usually, if I'm honest, it's usually they'll come up to me and they're like, how do I get as big as you, Kyle? And so after 10, 20 minutes of telling them that, no, and then I realized they're like, hey, here's how you can lose weight. Oh, okay. Now, I was talking to him, and we started talking about a little bit of lifting, and then he just started telling about his life, and we got into some different things there. And I mentioned to him what I really believe. I said, I believe God orchestrates even some of the small things like this conversation. There's so many more. It's not as if God's only on us and everybody else is to the side. He orchestrates all these conversations. He's like the great divine multitasker, like he can do all this stuff. And so I believe that. I think he sets up some of those conversations, and that's what I was telling him. I said, I think he does this, and he does it. We can look at that and see God works in those things, but what better way to have even more faith that God has all this under control than to see that he's arranged history a certain way to really tell his story of his love for us or our need for him. Write that down. This is like a long sentence. I was trying to figure out the best way I wanted to say it, but I just say God arranged history to better illustrate his love for us and his control over everything. I just want you to get that. I think God has arranged history. You see that in the Old Testament. You see his dealings with the nation of Israel. You see his dealing with all the nations. You see his dealings with us and just the world and all this stuff. I look at that now, and it helps me better understand God is in control. God can do all these things, and he's working out all these details here. And then when I go back and I read fulfilled prophecy, and I see, okay, he knew this was going to happen. This wasn't, an accident. It helps me understand better things. It just gives me more confidence that he has all this in control. And it brings up passages like this. I'll put this on the screen. Isaiah 55:9. I'm sure you've heard this, even the previous verse. But Isaiah 55:9, as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. As the heavens are, in fact, I was just trying to think about this to get even deeper into it. As the heavens are higher than the earth. And you think about space. When you're talking about heavens, it's just talking about, the sky and space and everything out there. You think about space itself is stretching out. I mean, even as we speak, it's going out there. I don't know, you can look at that and say, as the heavens are higher than the earth, like as space itself is stretching out there even further, and we don't even have the technology right now to see to the ends, of the universe. Like we think we see all this out there, and I just imagine how far it actually goes, what God has actually done out there, compared to what we think we're seeing. We have these telescopes that are going way out there, and we're like, man, we can see when all this came into being, and we just have no clue in how it is out there. And so I think about it as it's stretching out there. And you think about that statement again, as the heavens, as the sky, as space, and all that are higher than the earth, and how they're going out there. I don't know. I just thought about, it's currently stretching out there as we speak, so it's not this fixed point. So God's wisdom, in that way, it's like, you're never going to reach it. It's far superior to ours. He knows everything. He spoke us into existence. how can we ever think, like the arrogance of thinking we know more than God. He has all this wisdom and all this knowledge, and he spoke everything into existence. And it just helps me. It just helps me understand, okay, in these times when I think maybe he's not there, he is, and he's got this plan. He's got this perfect plan worked out. The Old Testament, this covenant, what he was doing in the past, it was always working ahead. He's like, I've got this plan going. I know what I'm doing here, and it was always pointing ahead. So if you're ever out there just wondering, maybe take this to your everyday life. Like, is he really in this? Is he really doing something here? Is he working? Absolutely. The creator of everything knew every single one of us before we were ever born. He knew about our life. He knew everything about us before we were ever born. And he wanted that relationship with you. He wanted you to have a relationship with him. And it's like I see him in Scripture and I see him just in the world, like trying to show us his love for us, like reaching out to us. I see that. It just becomes so much more clear to me every day of my life that I grow in Christ. And I have more confidence in him. And I want you guys to have more confidence in him. This world, everything he's doing is not an accident. Your situation in life, whatever it is, it may be some situation come up later. It may stink. It may be really bad. It may be something that we wouldn't wish on our worst enemy. We may not even can imagine what you're going through here, but it's like, it's not outside of God's knowledge. He knows all that. He knows exactly what you're going through. And I want you to understand that he does have a plan. So don't think that it's some type of an accident. You kind of slip through the system, and don't ever think that you are an accident. We may be an accident to our parents or whatever. We may say that or whatever. We are not an accident to God. He knows us. He knew every single thing about us before we were ever born. There's passages about that. So when I read this about in the Old Testament, the Old Covenant, and all these things, and these fulfilled prophecies that came about in Jesus, and I see that, it gives me more confidence that I can actually say that. Maybe used to I would just say, you're not an accident, and I would say that, and I really didn't know. Does God really know me? But the more I get in this, the more it just comes up inside me. It's like, man, he does know this. He does have a plan. He has a purpose through all this. This covenant was planned, and it was purposeful, and it was leading ahead to the perfect fulfilled plan in Jesus. It was always in him, in grace. The pain is going to be removed one day. The sin, the imperfections in this world. We can take comfort in that. That is still future. That is going to happen. He's defeated sin and death. All this stuff is led up to him. He went to the cross, and he rose from the grave, and we see all these things. Like, why is there any reason for us to doubt his love? Why is there any reason for us to doubt his ability to be greater than anything? He is greater than anything. And I just want you guys to really understand that. I don't know what you're going through. I don't know the pain that you're dealing with. I don't know the decisions you're going to make. If anything today, I just wanted you to really get that down. I want to push you into Scripture more, into your relationship with God more. But I want you to understand he does have a plan. I don't know what it is. I can sit here and rattle off some things, and sometimes I'll do that. You'll come to me and say, this is happening in my life, and secretly inside, I'm just like, I don't know what to say here. That's probably 90% of the time. Just in all honesty, I'm like, I don't know what to say here. I'm going to pray right there. But I want you to have comfort in knowing that the creator of the universe, it was not an accident. You were not an accident. He's doing something. He just wants us to trust in him, whatever that is. If I can push you in that way, he has a plan. All this is not outside of his will and his plan. He knows what he's doing there. He fulfilled his purpose. Jesus was just the pinnacle of all of this, and he fulfilled it all. He defeated sin and death. He defeated sin and death. There's nothing he can't defeat in your life. There's nothing that he can't do. And I want you guys to understand that he does have a plan. You guys will go ahead and